Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is melt. Let's start by taking a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first and most common way you'll hear the verb melt used is to mean to change from a solid state to a liquid state. So if you live in a colder climate, it's likely that you experience some snow and maybe some ice this winter. And now that ice, something that was in a solid state, is changing to water, to a liquid state. So this process is one reason I picked this verb at this time of year. A second way you might hear the verb melt used is to mean to dissolve into a liquid. Sometimes in recipes, you'll see this used. Again, sort of combining something, so maybe melting sugar into warm water, as an example. A third way you might hear the verb melt used is to mean to make or become more tender, milder, more gentle, or more loving. So the way we tend to hear this used is with someone saying that a particular person or that person's actions melted their heart. So it made them more loving or maybe more gentle. You should know that melt is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all I need to do is add ing to form melting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. The base verb, melt, ends in a T sound, so our ed is going to make an id sound. You should hear an extra syllable with this. Melted, melted. Now, let's spend a minute looking at some phrasal verbs with melt. And I just have two for us to look at today, but I have two very different meanings for each one. So let's start with melt away. The first way you might hear this particular phrasal verb used is to mean to melt or to cause something to melt into a liquid. Here is an example of this usage. The sun has melted the ice away. So again, pretty common when we're talking about snow and ice. A second definition for melt away is for something to disappear or vanish gradually, so very slowly, not rapidly or quickly. Here's an example. As the parade crowd melted away, cleanup crews began to pick up trash. So again, this is describing people sort of leaving the parade route very slowly. The second phrasal verb we're going to take a look at is melt down. And again, this can have two possible meanings. One is to heat a solid. And typically we think of metals with this particular phrasal verb. And you're heating the solid until it becomes a liquid. So again, this ties back to that first definition we looked at. Here's an example sentence. She melted down her old gold jewelry. So the sentence doesn't explain why. Maybe it's to make a new piece or to be able to sell the gold. But for whatever reason, she started with solid metal and turned it into liquid. And then eventually it would harden again. A second way to use melt down is to mean to become angry or upset. Here is an example sentence. The toddler will melt down if he doesn't get his toy. So this particular phrasal verb is something many parents have seen happen to their children. So the child might become angry and upset, start crying, stomp their feet, maybe throw things, lie on the floor, kick and scream. That is describing the process of melting down. Now let's take a look at some sample sentences with our verb of the day, melt. Today we're going to focus on making sentences in the present progressive and the present perfect. Let's start with the present progressive. To make this verb tense, I'm going to use a present form of be and then the ing form of the verb. And I'm using this verb tense to either describe an action that is happening right now or an action that is in progress. So let's look at an affirmative example. The ice caps at the North Pole are melting. And if you follow science news, you know this is a really big deal. This is due to global warming, and this can have really bad effects on a number of animals, including us, human beings. Now, if I want to make a negative present progressive sentence, again, I'm going to start with a form of be. So that's am, is, or are. Then I'll have not, and then the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. The ice cream cone isn't melting. So this action is not happening right now. And if you want to make a yes or no question in the present progressive, so you're asking, is something happening right now, or is this action in progress, you'll want to start with a form of be. You're picking the form that matches the subject, and the subject comes next, and then the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Is the candle melting? So again, maybe this is another good visual of something going from a solid state into a liquid state. You get a candle really hot, the wax melts. Now let's take a look at the present perfect. We use this verb tense to describe an action that happened in the past at some unknown time, or an action that started in the past and continues into the present. To make the present perfect, we're going to use a present form of have, so that will be have or has, depending on what our subject is, and then the participle form of the verb. Let's look at another example. The snow in my backyard has already melted. So this is a true example. It's been really warm where I live for the last week, and I think I felt like we started the week with about 2 feet of snow, but most of it is now gone. If I want to make a negative present perfect sentence, I'm going to insert not after have or has. And again, I have another true example. The snow in my front yard hasn't melted yet. So there's some really big trees that are shading my front yard, so it's not getting as much sunlight. So we haven't had that process of going from the solid to the liquid. Finally, if you want to make a yes or no question in the present perfect, you're going to start with either have or has, whatever your subject is, and picking one that matches your subject, which comes next, and then the participle form of the verb. Have your new pets melted your family's heart? Again, that goes back to that third definition we looked at a little bit earlier, not a literal melting. Now, let's spend just a couple minutes looking at some related words and phrases that are connected to our verb melt. The first word we're going to look at is a noun. It's the noun form of this word, so same spelling, same pronunciation. And just like our verb, this noun can have several different meanings. I've picked out 2 for us to look at. So when someone uses melt as a noun, it could be referring to an act or a period of time where there is melting occurring. Here's an example of that definition. What are the creeks and streams like during the spring melt? So this might be a question, somebody who's new to a particular area, they're referencing the time of the year where snow and ice tends to melt. Something that maybe is a little different for people, particularly if you haven't lived in the United States very long, but you might see this word melt on a menu. And if you see that in a restaurant, it's referring to a sandwich or possibly a hamburger that has been topped with melted cheese. So here's an example of this noun with this particular meaning. He ate a tuna melt for lunch. So this would be a tuna fish sandwich with some melted cheese over the top. And I think for some people, they are absolutely delicious, and other people kind of get grossed out of the idea of fish and cheese being combined. The next word we'll look at is the adjective melty. This means melting, so something is in progress, that it's partially melted, or it's very soft in the consistency. So here's an example of this particular adjective. You better eat your ice cream quickly. It's already melty. The next word we'll look at is the noun meltdown. So you can, if you remember back, we looked at this phrasal verb just a couple minutes ago. And so they were separated then into two words. For the noun, I'm combining them into a compound word. And this can mean a breakdown or sort of the loss of one's self-control. So here's an example of this meaning. The defendant had a meltdown in court. So if I saw that sentence, what I'm envisioning again is maybe someone started yelling, crying, maybe they started doing physical things, banging their hands on the table or desk that was in front of them, probably had to be reminded, quiet down, calm down. Yeah. The last thing we're going to look at is the phrase to melt in one's mouth. So this is a compliment usually, and it's used to talk about food. So we are describing some food that is so tender that you barely have to chew it. So the idea is just the heat or the warmth of your mouth causes it to melt. So here's an example. These brownies melt in my mouth. So you're generally going to see a possessive adjective right before mouth. Either mine, his, hers, mine, his mouth, her mouth, their mouth, etc. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.